But then that's permanent, isn't it? How do I get rid of that?
It's fluid in there, isn't it?
I don't think you can do that. It's too permanent. But they start there to where they end.
No. How about I fence it with a needle and
Hey! Shall I bring, would you do that? Okay.
Hey, John. How are you,
I
my
think
mate?
Watson's got to get on the highway. Looking for adventure.
I had fun, bro. It was liberating.
Leather jacket.
Oh, yeah, no.
Oh, there is. Right next to Linda.
Good to see you. Seems like ages.
Okay, right. We will. Just, I won't declare the meeting open because that means we go live. So, but if we could get the networking everything. We'll declare the meeting open. Welcome to everyone. Where's my hub? As you know, we have this meeting, then we have a brief briefing after the meeting just on asset disposals and acquisitions, and then we're going to have Brian Roche on the CRLL who's coming to present. Obviously, if you'd read the Herald today, you'd know what that is probably going to be about. So we will start by asking for apologies, which we have Councillor Sharon Stewart and we have Josephine Bartley on leave of absence, both for leave of absence. So, and Member Honeck has been replaced by Jibidauko Tauhanari.
Happy to move the apologies.
Chair, I know that Councillor Collins mentioned he was coming here, so I know he's on the way. For lateness, okay, Councillor Collins for lateness. All right. We have got a mover, which is Councillor Wayne Walker. Welcome back, John. And seconded by Councillor John Walker. All those in favour?
Aye.
Right, declarations of interest. Any declarations? Confirmation of the minutes, please, Councillor Simpson, Councillor Cooper, thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. There are no petitions, there's no public input, there's no local board input, and no extraordinary business that I'm aware of. And we will have the disposal recommendations report, so invite Anthony, Rachel, Marion, you're all here. Yep, all good. Welcome. Why did we have that there in the middle?
Yeah, she is. I think she is. Or am I getting her? Maybe I'm getting a cab.
So we have to bear with what's sitting in the middle there. It looks a bit unusual, but if something gets fixed up. So it's kind of right in the way, but anyway, it's the way it is. Right.
But we can go through together if you want.
Anthony or Marion?
Mr. Chair, just before we start, I'd like to introduce Rachel Hume to the committee. Rachel is the acting team leader portfolio review. She's working in place of Letitia Edwards while she's on maternity leave, and you'll see probably more and more of Rachel in the future.
Yes, good morning,
Welcome.
Chair and the committee. So you have the report in front of you. I'll just go through some key messages. 4 properties presented to you today. 132 Green Lane East is a car park leased exclusively to the adjoining businesses. AT have assessed the property and found it's not required for transport infrastructure purposes. Through the rationalisation process, Panuku has identified it as having potential for an alternate public work, that being urban renewal, given its size, location and proximity to public transport. If it is approved for disposal for housing and urban renewal purposes, Panuku will ensure that any development is in line with housing outcomes of the Panuku's SOI objectives and the Auckland Plan. The Panuku Board has the delegated authority to approve the terms and conditions. There is commercial interest from 2 iwi groups. We will follow up if approved for disposal. The next property, 28 Lockwood Ave, Prapakura. If you recall, it was presented in October 2017. However, Panuku were tasked with going away to better formulate a response from our mana whenua consultation. We have gone back to all the iwi entities who registered interests. One iwi entity has advised that its interest has been withdrawn following a site visit and assessment of the property. It's of low value to them, so they're no longer interested. However, there is commercial interest from other iwi entities, and the current tenant is interested in acquiring it if approved for disposal. The other 2 sites, vacant sites. They were originally vested with the legacy city councils upon subdivision. Edward Freeman Place is a local purpose road reserve. Pars Cross Road is a road reserve. When assessed against current needs, they don't provide current or planned transport infrastructure use. They're not a priority for retention when assessed against council's parks and open space acquisition policy and the open space provision policy. There is commercial interest from iwi and an adjoining landowner in acquiring one of the properties. The Henderson Massey Local Board endorsed the reserve revocation and the proposed disposal earlier on this year. Free to take any questions, thank you.
I'm happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Just of interest, the Green Lane property, had they been paying rent on that?
Yes, it is on a month-by-month basis. The previous tenant, you'll be aware, was Nosh.
Yeah.
Nosh went into receivership and basically Panuku had to write off that debt of the outstanding rent.
All right. Councillor Walker.
Sure. The property at Green Lane, the Albert Eden Local Board resolved that its preferred outcome is to land bank the site for future town centre development as identified in the unitary plan.
Bring the speaker closer, Wayne. Please.
Is there any comment on that?
Yes, through the chair, we did go back and consult with the local board. We did provide advice along the lines that council can't hold land bank, or can't land bank land when there's no identified strategic purpose. Council's chief planning office was consulted as part of the rationalisation process. They didn't identify a need to require, didn't identify a requirement to retain in council ownership. And when we gave that advice back to the local board, they then advised they wouldn't oppose a disposal.
And the other question I've got, just in terms of development of these sites, is Panuku proposing to leverage any particular development so that we actually achieve some additional income from the development itself, or are we simply going to flog it off?
Oh, if you don't mind, I'll just defer to Marion here.
So we will be looking for development outcomes on the site at 132 Green Lane East. Part of the process there will be to we'll encumber the title to ensure that the developer undertakes the development in line with what we would like to be delivered on that site, and we will ensure that council is sufficiently protected should anything happen with that developer. Council will have step-in rights to ensure that basically any development that we would look to happen on that site happens.
My question is around whether there's an opportunity for us to leverage an outcome to avail ourselves of some of the development as compared to just selling the land, because this is quite a strategic position and there aren't that many properties available in an area like this that come up.
So again, through the property will be assessed for development outcomes. Should the council wish to retain any part of that land for development purposes, we can do that. But we would look at this point to obtaining housing outcomes and other urban renewal outcomes on that site. So we can do that if we wish to do so. Yes.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, good morning. The Ranui and Henderson properties are gazetted under the Reserves Act, presumably as recreation reserves, or
Through the chair, one is a road reserve, another one is a local purpose road reserve. They're not recreation reserves under the Reserves Act.
they're road reserves?
Yes, that's
under
correct.
the Reserves Act.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm happy to move the recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
Move, yep. Second.
I'm happy to second.
Right, well, there's no further discussion on that, so I'll put those recommendations A and B. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Right, thank you. Right, we're moving straight on
Thank
to,
you.
Thank you, Panuku team. Paul. Item number 9.
Mr. Chairman, so this item has already been to the
Environment and Community Committee. So it's a land exchange between Auckland Council and the Tamaki Regeneration Company. The Environment and Community Committee approved the acquisition of the TRC land. It's a requirement that this comes to this committee because it involves the disposal of land. So in order to complete that land exchange, it's requested that this committee approves the disposal of council land to TRC to complete that land exchange.
Councillor Hulse, happy to move?
I'll second, oh no. I was just going to say that Councillor Bartley, as the local councillor, understood and supported this to get a better outcome. So that's why I'm happy to second it again.
You'll second it?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. All right, well, I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? No? Right. Thank you.
We'll be finished by 10 o'clock. Right. Should have brought forward that
Okay.
CRL one.
Well, this is a record-setting meeting. We're actually going to take a 10-minute break because Price Waterhouse was told to come at 10 o'clock. So we will take a break for 10 minutes.
Cool.
You folks?
Sweet.
Should have recessed more often.
Yeah, that's right.
About the student.
Except for what my minister had to say to me.
Welcome to our guests. We apologise for those cameras in the middle there. We've had a breakdown with the rest of the system, so we're having to look up and around. So, Member Tapu, would you like to give a brief welcome, please?
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chairman.
Koe.
Kia koe te koro mātou e tēnei rā. Tēnā koro, Jane, Lara. Ka nui te mi kia koutou i tēnei wā. Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. It's obviously a privilege for us to be able to ask PwC to come today to present to Council via the Finance and Performance Committee the latest independent audit that's been undertaken. This is the third one. One was in 2012 and then 2015 and now our present one. So because I'm full of the flu, I won't talk too much and ask that Lara and Jade present the findings of that report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Lara and Jade.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ko tēnei he mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. Ki te tau toko ahau me te tima I PwC te huarahi tika pono me te aroa mo te iwi Māori e. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello. We're delighted to be here today and to be able to present the findings of, as David said, our third Tiriti audit. Overall, I'm very pleased to say that Council has come a long way since the last audit. And I'd like to talk you through some of those positive steps, but also some of the areas where some additional improvements are required. So what the audit has seen is that many of the fundamental building blocks that were missing to drive systematic practices to drive positive outcomes for Māori have been developed over the course of the period between the last audit and this. This is a really significant step change. We do point out, though, that some of these activities or some of these fundamental building blocks are newly established, and so there will be time for them to be embedded and also then to see the change actually come about as a result of those fundamental building blocks. There are three key messages that I'd like to touch on at an exec summary level. And then I'm going to hand over to Jade to just talk through, in each of the three parts of the audit, the high risk or the high rated recommendations that we're making. Excuse me. So the first key message that I have for you is that the formal treaty audit response work program is achieving really good momentum. 75% of the audit recommendations are closed, and the remaining 25 are in progress, and that progress is substantial. The reasons for the success are threefold. In essence, there is much greater formality around the work program than has been in the past. There's widespread awareness of the program, and the action owners are now, in line with our recommendations from the last audit, the action owners are actually now outside of Te Wakangamua and into council itself. And that lessens the reliance on a smaller group of people for driving those actions. Another element of the success has been the elevation of some of the significant and strategic actions as council-wide priorities and programs of work. And then finally, the monitoring of the work program. So again, some of the recommendations that we made last time around how the monitoring could be enhanced to really drive those completion of those actions. The Waharo group has been set up. That includes the IMSB Secretariat and the internal audit, and the results or the progress on those outstanding actions is being reported to your Audit and Risk Committee. I do note there has been a slower start to the program of work, and so although it is the full set of actions are due for completion on the 30th of June, at least 5 of those actions won't be completed by that due date, but this was signalled early to the February Audit and Risk Committee. Excuse me. Revised due dates for those actions are still in progress. The second key message that I would share with you is that what we are seeing is a much more mature approach to enable the council to deliver on the principles of Te Tiriti and fulfil the statutory obligations to Māori. So you may recall from the very first audit report, if you were around this table at that time, we spoke of the concepts of an internal control framework and the different elements or fundamental building blocks that needed to be in place to be able to really bring to life the delivery of the outcomes that were required. Those were things like, clear, explicit expectations being documented in policy and then driven through a tone at the top. Processes that are well established and that give effect to those policies and that tone, and then controls in place to ensure the right behaviours and really give effect to those policies consistently, with also mechanisms that enable quick identification where those policies aren't being complied with. Of course, wrapping all of that up is training, support and funding. And, in essence, monitoring and reporting to ensure that all of those different elements or basic fundamental building blocks are actually operating effectively. Or, if not, there's an ability to course correct early. So, as I said in the very beginning, we really are seeing an improvement across all of these fundamental areas. We're not there yet in terms of being fully implemented, but certainly great progress has been made. Again, some of the key observations of what we would see is there's certainly a strong commitment to move beyond a compliance and a tick box exercise, with a focus on building really good relationships with Māori and looking for how do we get the best and the right outcomes for Māori. Clearer expectations and accountabilities. We've an updated organisational charter and CEO performance objectives as part of that framework. There's a comprehensive toolkit and review processes that are available to make sure that the Māori responsiveness plans, which really are a key delivery mechanism, are effective and relevant to the particular area of the business that they're focused in. Many of those Māori responsiveness plans have focused initially on building staff capability, which has been a really important first step. And then also an action-oriented Māori employment and capability framework in the Council, wide measures and actions for high impact, the Mahi strategy, which will enable further responsiveness to Māori. The third key message is really to flag the areas of significant work that are still underway to better align and better measure efforts, and that really touches on a number of areas that are still in development. Those relate to areas of the establishment of relationship agreements, full implementation of the Māori responsiveness plans, improving the alignment of the Māori responsiveness plans to strategic priorities for Māori, and developing the performance measurement framework. I'm going to hand over to Jade to talk through just the key high-rated findings in the three areas of the scope, but I did want at this point just acknowledge that Council Management have had the opportunity to work with us to frame up their response to the report, and pleased to acknowledge that the recommendations that we have been making have been accepted by them, and there is a work program that's being established as a result. Jade, over to you.
Thank you. So as I talk through a bit of a high-level overview of the scope and our key high-rated findings, I just want to draw your attention to page 68 of the agenda, which is a summary of findings diagram, which will be helpful as I speak through our key findings. So the audit identified that some improvements are required to the Council's processes and controls for meeting its legislative requirements to Māori. And the audit covered three different scope areas. Firstly, we looked at the Council's program for managing actions to address the recommendations from previous treaty audits. So these are actions to deliver on compliance obligations. And as Lara mentioned, the kinds of things like policies to be put in place, processes to be established, and monitoring processes as well. This is audit part one, and we had three findings in this area. Our high-rated finding number one, was that some of the actions in this program didn't fully address prior recommendations, and were therefore not well aligned to the underpinning statutory requirements. In some cases, what we found was that some of these actions were missing processes and controls to ensure that what was being implemented would be implemented consistently and correctly, both now and in the future.
An example of what I'm talking about here is, for example, the relationship agreements and capacity contracts. What we found is that while these are being developed and signed up to, they're missing the processes wrapped around these to ensure that the commitments agreed to in these agreements are monitored through the duration of these agreements. We also found that some of the actions in this Treaty Audit Response Program had been closed off by Council, but without full evidence of the closure required to close off this item, and therefore some aspects of the recommendations hadn't been properly addressed. Given that there are still some actions remaining in this Treaty Audit Response Program, we're recommending that Council should review the action closure criteria, so the criteria with which they deem an action to be closed, and amend these to ensure that they fully address the previous audit recommendations and also the underpinning statutory requirements. Also, evidence of closure of an action should always be sought by the Waharoa Group prior to closing off an action. Moving on to our second audit part, this is where we looked at the Council's Māori Responsiveness Plan program. We first looked at the program for developing MRPs and the toolkit and support and review processes available as these are developed. And then we also looked at a sample of Māori responsiveness plans and how they are monitored and reported on with regard to the initiatives within those plans. In the sample of the Māori responsiveness plans that we did look at, our key finding here, finding number 4, was that progress monitoring of the actions or initiatives agreed to in these strategic plans was not always monitored regularly, nor reported on to show progress against the agreed milestones and outcomes set out in these strategic documents. Given that these MRPs are 3-year strategic documents, we're recommending improved monitoring of the MRP initiatives to ensure that the milestones and outcomes that are agreed to in the strategic plan document are delivered on within the timeframe set. We're recommending this needs to be driven by MRP sponsors or senior leaders in the organisation with the oversight of the Māori responsiveness plans. In our third scope area of the audit, we looked at a sample of actions within that Treaty Audit Response Program. We looked at a sample of closed actions to see whether these we agreed with the closure, and open actions to understand if they were on track, if what was being planned aligned with previous audit recommendations. Our key finding here, and this is finding 6, which was also rated high, relates to relationship agreements and capacity contracts, which I touched on earlier. Both these treaty audit actions had been assessed as the council management team by closed. However, we found that not all aspects of the original recommendations were addressed. And this is what I mentioned earlier with regard to those processes wrapped around those contracts and agreements. So these were our key high-rated findings on the audit. As you can see on page 68, we did identify a number of other moderate and minor rated findings also.
Thank you, Jade. That was the overview that we had planned to share with you. Happy to pause and take any questions or comments.
Councillor Casey.
Across council and CCOs, how many Māori responsiveness plans are expected, and how many have been completed, and how many are in progress, and how many haven't started? I've tried to find that in here and I haven't been able to.
Yep. Yeah. Just give me a moment just to find that. I think part of that question is in the report, but I'll track it down for you. Just give me a second.
As Jade does that, the number of Māori responsiveness plans from memory that were completed is ahead of schedule in terms of what was planned for.
I think I'm looking for the how many. What's
Yes.
the N number?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the expectation of the number of plans that would be entered into, in the original Treaty Audit Response Program that was agreed to in October 2015, the Council had committed to the development and implementation of 9 MRPs by June of this year. So at the time of the audit, they'd actually exceeded this amount. So there were 16 approved Māori responsiveness plans in implementation, and 1 was pending final review. They had 9 in development, and there were 10 departments, including some CCOs, that were initiating development discussions. So of the CCOs that we surveyed through this audit, Auckland Transport's MRP was completed, Watercare's was in progress, and Panuku's was, I'll need to double check that, but yeah, there was some still in progress of the sample that we looked at.
And of the CCOs in particular, which haven't started yet or which haven't done any?
There was no one in the sample that we selected. There was no one who hadn't done anything.
That's right, yeah.
So everybody had
Yeah,
started
started
the journey.
yeah.
Is some are quicker than others?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Bearing in mind we haven't sampled all CCOs.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Just a question around local board relationship agreements. So I'm just wondering how you deal with saying something's closed or not. If a local board doesn't want to have a relationship agreement, do you deal with that as being left open, or it's closed because politically it won't move anymore?
It's a really good
It
question.
depends how you measure it. If you you insist there must be one, but politically it's not going to happen, that's where's the...
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so what we've found through this work is that SAMI, we have a relationship with the local board. SAMI, we don't want a relationship with the local board. They want a relationship with the governing body.
Yeah.
And some local boards don't see the value or need to have a relationship either. So we've left it open from a point of view of there's probably a bigger issue to resolve around how do you best establish relationships at the right sort of level. So for us, we've left that as an open.
So that means incomplete.
Yeah.
So that counts in those numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's...
And I think that's...
And so in terms of, sorry, just if you don't mind, so
No,
in
no.
terms of in the local board land, we don't have any, the governing body has no influence over that. Are you going to address that with local board services?
Well, I think what...
We have no control over the decisions there.
Yeah, so what we would do as auditor is we put that back through to management to say, well, the management team need to work through with iwi what the right outcome is, and then once that's decided, from an audit perspective, we then come and audit against the outcome that you've decided.
Okay, so it'll go back to management.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Member Topering.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman. First thing I want to say is that we've, let's just say this is the third audit, and the first two haven't been that great, but this one has been good. This one has shown a lot of progress and should be acknowledged as such. And yes, some are slower than others, some are quicker than others, but to not acknowledge the progress that's been made would be wrong. So that's the first thing I want to say. The question of just that one that was just raised there by Councillor Cooper, the board has got a position that the completion of the relationship agreements is with the governing body. And there are other factors of the family group which include CCOs and the like and local boards. But our measuring tool in terms of what we see is a completed relationship agreement is with the governing body. And if the governing body want to work with the local boards and others, or iwi themselves want to work, or Mātai Waka want to work with local bodies, local boards, so be it. But so we do have a bit of a definite position in terms of where we're getting to here, otherwise that piece of string just gets way too long. So I just wanted to put that out there, that would be the measuring tool. Again, the relationship agreements are fundamental, because if you don't know who you're supposed to be talking to, then how are you ever going to get to an end result? So we would agree that that is quite a crucial part of the mix. And again, just to follow on what I just said a minute ago, to avoid the confusion of who it should be with the governing body first and foremost. So that's the task really at hand here with the governing body, I guess, to take charge of that responsibility with all the tools and resources they have at their disposal to make that happen. Again, you need a willing partner, of course, and that is Māori. But I haven't heard anyone that's unwilling to have a relationship with the governing body. So I just wanted to pass on the fact that progress has been made. I think one of the other significant things to mention is the participation and the involvement by internal audit and risk. I think that has been a key factor in terms of the progress being made and the twice yearly reporting to the Audit and Risk Committee, and we're strong advocates that remains in position to make sure that there's monitoring and accountability along the way. Mr. Chairman, just certainly want to support what's been said today by PwC. I would note in the recommendations, though, that it talks in B about officers reporting back, this council officers reporting back to the joint governing body and independent Māori Statutory Board meeting. I think this should also come back to finance and performance. And why I say that is because this is where it's been delivered in the first instance. The second thing is it's limited attendance at the joint governing body and independent Māori Statutory Board, and it seems to always have full membership at this committee. So I would ask and seek that there's an amendment included to B that says to the joint governing body and independent Māori Statutory Board, so, and finance and performance. I'm happy to move such.
Councillor Wayne Walker, so we'll make that amendment.
Thank you.
Sure. Just got a couple of questions, and I appreciate this is an audit process around compliance with Treaty of Waitangi. Is there any audit that goes to the costs of meeting all these obligations and efficiency of the operation on council's part?
Perhaps I can make a comment in terms of the audit approach and then certainly allow further comments. And David's recent comment is a really good example. When we are undertaking the audit and making recommendations around policy and process, especially around process, we're very keen to make sure that we make recommendations around linking into mainstream council processes that exist already or existing projects that can include elements of Māori responsiveness. So it's something we've been very cognizant of. And if you think of, instead of suggesting a separate monitoring regime for the audit work program, we went to your existing processes of, you have an internal audit department who do this for other outstanding issues, let them do that for this. You have an audit and risk committee that they're accountable to, let this program grow through that process as well. So we are very cognizant from an audit recommendation perspective to make sure, because actually it's at the heart of buy-in, is if we have processes that run on the side of what exists, we won't get that systematic change. Whereas if you actually embed what we're recommending into existing process, you're much more likely to get the change that you're looking for. But the Chair may want to add further comment.
And the other question I had, and it's probably constructive for me to ask the questions.
Councillor Walker, should we just get Member Tapere to make comments?
I just thought,
That's fine.
through you, Mr. Chairman, I could probably respond by simply saying we spend so much time on the LTP to make sure it's right, to ensure we invest in Māori responsiveness plans and Māori responsiveness, and Council approves such a plan, which is then translated to an annual plan, is the funds that are spent towards achieving these outcomes, Wayne.
Got it. So the other question I've got, just in terms of the
Want me to high-five you now?
broader context of our council relative to other councils, how do we compare with our audit of Treaty of Waitangi compared to other councils and conceivably government agencies? I imagine they may have some requirements.
Yeah, it's a good question. From our perspective, no other council is undertaking an audit of this nature. So it's really iconic and something for Auckland Council to be especially proud of in terms of leading the way for Māori responsiveness for New Zealand. There are, of course, a number of projects that goes on in other councils, but to our knowledge there's nothing of this nature and stature that could be compared with.
And I thought that might be the response. Given that circumstance, is there any possibility of our attracting some funding from government or any other sources, local government, New Zealand or the like, given that we're effectively implementing something, putting together a template that I have no doubt will be picked up by government departments and certainly other councils? and quite obviously the cost of developing this is relatively high. That's always the case for any organisation that's doing something first off.
May I help, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, no, but I will say, Councillor Walker, you also understand, I mean, we usually get responsibility delegated to local government to do something, but very rarely do we get the funds that follow, so Member Taipuri.
May I help? Yes, please. Well, it's a legislative requirement, Councillor Walker, under the Auckland Council Act. So that's the first thing you need to be mindful of. And because it's such a new act, all the draconian acts that are in place for local government haven't included it yet, but should. And the good thing is that we share the audit report, the framework and templates in the context of how it's measured with other local government authorities. If you're talking about charging them for it, well, that's something that you'll have to think about. But we're just about sharing it to make New Zealand a better place. But the reasons that Auckland does it is because the Act requires it to do so.
Sure, and I understand that. And my last question, Mr. Chairman, quite obviously part and parcel of our delivering under our requirements under the Treaty of Waitangi is our relationship with the Independent Maori Statutory Board. So is there any oversight in the auditing process around our relationship with the IMSB and its role and its performance and efficiency in assisting us in meeting these objectives?
No, the audit approach is around the processes, policies that Auckland Council has in place to give effect to the statutory obligations. The IMSB's role in that is around advice and certainly around this table in terms of challenge and advice. The area where the IMSB is involved in those processes is in the Waharoa group, again as deciding on whether elements are completed. And that's a very, very small part. The audit is really focused on Auckland Council's processes and policies to give effect to the statutory obligations that it has.
Member Taipuri?
Thank you,
And then Councillor Cooper.
If I may just add, there is also legislative provision for that. It's called 4 joint meetings with the governing body and the Independent Māori Statutory Board per annum. So we use that facility and that opportunity to measure each other and how we're doing our duties and responsibilities under the requirements of the Act. So I would encourage Council and the board members to use that more readily and fully as an opportunity for us to measure both entities' performance in terms of how we're delivering together. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Just another question. In the Treaty Audit Response Work Programme, and that's page 38 of your report, there's 3 groups doing mana whenua participation and resource consents, but there's no duplicate of anything else. Does that mean there are actually 3 work streams on the same item? It's page 38, 39 of our report, and it's the Appendix E, Work Programme Action Group Status.
Could you just point us to
It'll be number 4.
Number 4, yeah.
Number 14, number 20. They're all the
yes.
same. And you've got 2 of the same
Yep.
of 21 and 22, but I'm just wondering why that's repeated.
The titles are the same, so they're grouped together, but the substance or detail within them in terms of the work required differs. So one's, if I can draw your attention to, we've got it in more detail in the report.
So it's just different work streams for the same outcome,
No, for different outcomes.
different outcomes.
Under the same heading. So
Okay.
often we'll make a recommendation that'll be, you know, it can be grouped into one
Blanket
heading,
recommendation.
but underneath it there may be 1 or 2 or 3 actions.
Okay.
And if I may, that's probably also what it makes it, it can be easy for people to deal with the first 2 and leave the third, for example, which
Right.
is also why we say, look, you've done 2/3 of it, but there's a little bit more you need to do to close it off finally.
Thank you.
So on page 22 of our report, you'll see findings 4, 14 and 20, mana whenua participation and resource consent, and the differences between those.
Thanks.
Councillor Walker. Yes?
So one quick question. Was there any engagement with councillors as part of this process? Because obviously, individually and as a body, we carry out the obligations.
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. Is that something you think might be useful in the future?
It certainly could be, but we do work with both the IMSB and management to work through who the best people are and who we need to be engaging through the audit. That happens through the audit scoping phase. So if that is the case, it's usually highlighted at that point, but certainly something to consider.
All right, okay, well, thank you. There doesn't appear to be any other further questions of Lara and Jade, so Member Tapu, did you want to move or?
I did move, yes.
Yes, okay.
Second.
Councillor?
No.
Oh, right.
No.
Councillor Cooper, did you second?
No,
Way
I
back?
think Member Hinara did,
Okay,
but I mean,
Hinara,
I'm
No, sweet, whoever.
yeah,
Cool.
I will.
I can get my name in the minutes in other ways.
Member, sorry, Councillor Filipina wants, he wants to second, right.
No, I don't want a second. I've got questions.
You want to leave?
Not to our two ladies.
Okay.
I got questions after.
What's after?
What do you mean after? When we
Well,
pass
after
the
they've done their
recommendation, there is no
presentation. After they've done their presentation.
Okay.
I mean, I got questions to you.
Hey,
Yep.
Okay.
To you.
That sounds
And that's
Could have
why
passed it earlier, shouldn't
Oh, no, I didn't want to sort of confuse the fact that our two ladies are here.
We have a mover
the
and we
report.
have a seconder in Councillor Cooper. So, Member Filipina.
Okay, look, the question is on our page 67, it's the comment from our CEO, and then in the third paragraph, there's a mention that I commit us to carefully considering all recommendations and responding to them in due course. Now, my question is in reply to B. When are we getting a time frame from our CEO or yourself, Chair, in regards to the to responding to them? There was right through was around the monitoring, so that's where the question is: when are we getting that back? Around the time frame, there's been no mention around the time frames.
Yep.
There has, when you read the report around the monitoring, it's been said by our by Lara around the monitoring several times. So, but I'm looking at a time frame as to when that comes back to. That's one question. The second question is in regards to B and clarification around B. Now, are we duplicating and is it pointless going back to the joint governing body and an independent Māori statutory board meeting the results or detailed response that's coming to here based on what the chair of the independent Māori statutory board said, which was we don't have that many councillors attending the table. So that's the question around B and just getting clarification.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to speak to the amendment, which is B.
Yep,
about.
let's deal with that,
Yep.
and then maybe Stephen.
So simply why I've asked.
on the time frame. Or make
It's more on
Through
the...
you, Mr. Chairman, simply why I've asked for that is because there's only 2 members per committee, and there's 9 board members per the joint. But then I want to ensure that we encapsulate full membership, and those 2 vehicles would provide that.
Cool.
Okay.
Yep.
And Sarah,
Report back at the joint.
you can, please.
So council officers will report back on the timeframes at the joint meeting.
Okay, because we're, with the recommendations from the report, it's around monitoring and everything else, but for me, it's around the time frame that our CEO, that Stephen has, so look, that's fine. And when, I just reserve the right to speak to the recommendation as well.
You're on.
Oh, yeah? Look, I just, as one of the few members around the governing body that has been there from the start and had a look at the orders that have come through, I just want to sort of echo the comments that the chief executive, the chair of the Independent Māori Statutory Board has seen, which is with this third report, and it is pleasing to see. And you know, I've always been critical with the first two reports, but seeing the progress that we have had, and I just want to acknowledge both the ladies from PwC here, but you know, around the audits that we've had, and really just look forward to, one, the CCOs, for those that haven't caught up, to catch up. But again, I think it's just pleasing the progress that we had from 15 to 18. Thank you.
All right, well, we have no further comments, so we have the resolutions, the recommendations there, but I'd just like to make sure that Sarah passes back to Phil Wilson to pass on to Mark Maloney the good work that's been done by internal audit, and to echo what Member Tapari is reinforcing. Internal audit is playing an increasingly important role at Council, and remember there's only 2 people involved in that, or 3, maybe 2 or 3 in the team. So we've got the recommendations in front of you, A and B. I'll put those. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Right, thank you. Unanimous. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jade.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well done, ladies.
All right. Well, consideration of extraordinary items. There are none, and it's virtually a record meeting. So I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you. Right. We will take a